My husband reached across me to hold his ex-girlfriend's hand during our anniversary date. The irony? The movie was about second chances in love. I gave him 3 seconds to let go. He didn't. So I stood up, walked out of that theater, and made sure he'd spend the rest of his life wondering what happened to the woman who used to wait for him. Little did he know I'd been planning this moment for 6 months. The theater was one of those upscale places downtown, the kind Marcus loved because it made him feel important. Leather recliners, overpriced popcorn, and enough ambient lighting to see who was sitting where. Perfect for what I needed. Sarah had texted him right as the previews started. Some emergency with a client presentation that couldn't wait until Monday. How convenient that she happened to be in the same theater, 3 rows behind us. I watched in my peripheral vision as Marcus excused himself, whispering that he'd be right back. 5 minutes later he returned with Sarah trailing behind him like a lost puppy. "Babe, you don't mind if Sarah sits with us, do you?" Her date stood her up. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly I almost admired the craftsmanship. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd hired a private investigator 3 months ago. What he also didn't know was that Sarah's date was actually her Uber driver, who I'd paid to cancel on her at the last minute. And what he definitely didn't know was that I'd already moved $2 million from our joint accounts into an offshore trust that morning. As the romantic comedy played on screen, something about a woman giving her cheating ex-husband another chance, I felt Marcus's hand creep across my armrest. I thought he was reaching for me, maybe feeling guilty about Sarah's sudden appearance. Instead, his fingers intertwined with hers. I counted to 3 in my head, giving him every opportunity to realize what he was doing, to remember that his wife was sitting right there. 3. His grip on her hand only tightened. That's when I stood up. Not dramatically. Not with tears or shouting. I simply rose from my seat, smoothed my dress and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Marcus hiss Sarah's name, heard the rustle of movement as they both scrambled to follow me. But I was already pushing through the heavy theater doors, my heels clicking against the marble lobby floor. "Elena, wait." Marcus's voice echoed behind me, panic creeping in at the edges. "It's not what it looks like." I turned around slowly, giving him my most serene smile. The same smile I'd practiced in the mirror for weeks, knowing this moment would come. "Oh, Marcus. It's exactly what it looks like." Sarah appeared beside him, her face flushed and her carefully applied lipstick smudged. She had the audacity to look embarrassed, as if she hadn't orchestrated this entire evening. "Elena, I'm so sorry. We were just holding hands during my anniversary dinner," I finished for her. "How thoughtful of you both to commemorate the occasion. The thing about planning your own liberation is that it requires patience. 6 months ago, when I'd first discovered their weekend trips to the Hamptons disguised as client meetings, I could have confronted them immediately. I could have screamed, thrown things, demanded explanations. Instead, I'd smiled, kissed Marcus goodbye and started documenting everything. Every deleted text message, recovered. Every credit card statement, copied. Every business expense that was actually a romantic getaway, cataloged. I'd built a case against my own husband with the same methodical precision I'd once used to build his company's marketing strategy. "Elena, let's talk about this at home," Marcus said, reaching for my arm. I stepped back smoothly, keeping my distance. "Actually, I don't think we'll be going home together tonight. Or any night." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. It was a text from my lawyer. "Papers filed. Process server en route." The color drained from Marcus's face. "You can't be serious." I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I glanced at Sarah, who was standing there like a deer in headlights. "Sarah, darling, you might want to check your own bank accounts. I believe there are some irregularities in the business expenses you've been charging to the company. Something about spa weekends and jewelry purchases that don't quite qualify as legitimate business deductions." Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He'd always underestimated me, seen me as the supportive wife who managed his calendar and smiled at dinner parties. He'd forgotten that I had an MBA from Wharton, that I'd given up my own consulting firm to help him build his tech startup from nothing. That startup was now worth $50 million. And according to the incorporation documents I'd carefully preserved, I owned 60% of it. You planned this, he whispered, the realization finally dawning on him. I planned to have a lovely anniversary dinner with my husband, I replied calmly. You planned to hold another woman's hand during a movie about second chances. We both got what we planned for. As I walked toward the parking garage, I could hear them arguing behind me. Sarah's voice was shrill, demanding to know what I meant about her bank accounts. Marcus was trying to calm her down while simultaneously calling my phone, which I'd already silenced. My lawyer was waiting in the parking garage just as we'd arranged. David Kim had been my classmate at Wharton and was now one of the city's most ruthless divorce attorneys. He handed me a manila envelope with a satisfied smile. Everything's in motion, he said. The restraining order prevents him from accessing any business accounts, and we've frozen all joint assets pending the audit. The fraud investigation should begin Monday morning. I slid into my car, the BMW I'd bought with my own money from my consulting days, the one Marcus always borrowed for important meetings. Tonight it was finally coming home with me. My phone buzzed with text after text from Marcus. Apologies, explanations, desperate pleas for me to call him back. I deleted each one without reading it fully. After the 47th message, I finally replied with just 5 words. Check your bank account, darling. Then I drove to the Ritz-Carlton, where I'd booked the penthouse suite for the next month. It was time to start planning the next phase of my life. One where I'd never again have to watch my husband hold another woman's hand while I sat there pretending not to notice. The best part? Marcus still thought this was about jealousy. He had no idea that by tomorrow morning he'd wake up to discover that the woman who used to wait for him had finally stopped waiting and started winning. The morning after our anniversary disaster, I woke up in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than most people's rent. The penthouse suite at the Ritz had become my temporary headquarters and I'd never slept better. My phone showed 63 missed calls from Marcus, 12 from Sarah, and one very satisfied text from my lawyer. It's done. While I sipped my perfectly brewed coffee and watched the sunrise paint the city gold, Marcus was probably discovering that his corporate accounts had been frozen by court order. What he didn't know yet was that I'd been systematically removing myself from his business operations for months, transferring key client relationships to my own newly formed consulting firm. The irony was delicious. Marcus had always introduced me as just my wife at business dinners, never mentioning that I held advanced degrees in both marketing and corporate law. He'd forgotten that before I became Mrs. Marcus Chin, I was Elena Rodriguez, the woman who'd turned 3 failing startups into multi-million-dollar successes before I was 30. My assistant knocked on the door at exactly 9 a.m. Jennifer had been Marcus's executive assistant until last week, when I'd offered her double her salary and actual respect. She handed me a stack of documents and a knowing smile. The clients? I asked. 70% have already signed with your firm. The rest are waiting to see how the investigation plays out. Jennifer's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. She'd been fielding Marcus's inappropriate comments and Sarah's condescending demands for 2 years. Oh, and Marcus called the office 6 times this morning. I told him you were in meetings. I wasn't in meetings. I was orchestrating the systematic dismantling of everything Marcus had taken for granted, starting with the business empire we'd built together. The one where my name appeared on exactly 0 documents but my work comprised about 80% of the actual value. The first domino had fallen at 6 a.m. when Hartwell Industries, our biggest client, received a call from their new account manager. Me. Richard Hartwell had always preferred working with me anyway, though Marcus liked to take credit for the relationship. Within an hour, they'd terminated their contract with Marcus's firm and signed an exclusive deal with Elena Rodriguez Consulting. By noon, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, reviewing documents that would make Marcus's head spin. David Kim had outdone himself, uncovering financial irregularities that went back 3 years. It seems Sarah hadn't just been stealing my husband. She'd been stealing from his company too. Look at this, David said, sliding a spreadsheet across his mahogany desk. She's been padding expenses and creating fake vendor accounts. The spa weekend in Miami? Charged as a client entertainment expense. The jewelry from Cartier? Listed as promotional materials. Your husband signed off on everything without reading it. I studied the numbers with the analytical mind that Marcus had always claimed to admire but never actually listened to. How much total? Conservative estimate? $400,000 over 3 years. But Elena, this is bigger than embezzlement. Some of these payments went to accounts in the Cayman Islands. We might be looking at money laundering. That's when my phone rang. Marcus, of course. I'd been declining his calls all morning, but David nodded for me to answer. We'd already set up the recording system. Elena, thank God. Where are you? We need to talk. His voice sounded strained, desperate. Good. I'm exactly where I need to be, Marcus. How's your morning going? Pause. The bank called. They said our accounts are frozen. This is insane, Elena. You can't just. Actually, I can. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you actually read the documents you sign. Did you know you gave me power of attorney over all business decisions when you were in Prague last month? You were so eager to make that golf tee time that you signed everything I put in front of you. I could practically hear him fumbling through his memory, trying to recall what he'd signed. He'd always been careless with paperwork, trusting me to handle the details while he played the visionary. Elena, please. We can work this out. Last night was a mistake. Sarah means nothing to me. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to hear that, especially when the FBI starts asking questions about her creative accounting practices. Dead silence. What are you talking about? $400,000, Marcus. That's what Sarah has stolen from your company over the past 3 years. Well, technically it's my company too, since I own 60% of it. Did you forget about that little detail when you were holding her hand last night? David was taking notes, documenting every word for the inevitable court proceedings. Through his office window, I could see the city sprawling below us. A city where I was about to become a very different person than the wife who'd sat quietly in that theater 24 hours ago. This is ridiculous, Marcus sputtered. You're trying to destroy everything we built together over one stupid moment. One moment. I laughed, and it felt good to let the sound ring free. Marcus, I have 6 months of documentation. Hotel receipts, flight records, credit card statements. You've been having an affair with Sarah since last spring, and she's been robbing you blind while you were too infatuated to notice. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more calculating. What do you want? I want you to think very carefully about your next move. You can accept the divorce terms my lawyer is preparing, which will leave you with enough money to start over somewhere else. Or you can fight me in court, where every detail of your affair and Sarah's embezzlement becomes public record. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, shrill and panicked. She'd obviously been listening to the entire conversation. Oh, and Marcus, you might want to check the news. Someone leaked a very interesting story about tech executives who don't properly vet their business partners. Your company's stock has dropped 40% since the market opened. That someone was me, of course. I'd spent years building relationships with business journalists, always making sure they remembered Elena Rodriguez as a reliable source. Amazing how quickly those relationships became useful when you needed to control a narrative. I hung up and turned to David, who was grinning like a shark who'd smelled blood in the water. How long before he realizes the full scope of what's happening? I asked. Based on his track record? Probably around the time the FBI shows up at his office. Which should be. David checked his watch. Right about now. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. FBI just entered the building. Marcus looks like he's seen a ghost. I smiled and settled back into the leather chair. The morning had gone exactly according to plan, and it was only just beginning. By sunset, Marcus would understand that the woman who used to wait for him had been planning her exit strategy for months, building her own empire while he was busy thinking with parts of his anatomy that had nothing to do with business acumen. The best part? This was only day 1. By day 3, Marcus had figured out that his world wasn't just cracking. It was imploding in spectacular fashion. What he hadn't figured out was that I'd been the architect of his destruction long before he'd ever reached for Sarah's hand in that theater. The FBI raid on his office had been thorough. Agents spent 14 hours cataloging financial records, seizing computers, and interviewing employees who suddenly remembered all sorts of interesting details about Sarah's expense reports and Marcus's convenient absences. The local news had picked up the story by evening. Tech CEO under federal investigation for financial fraud. I watched the coverage from my penthouse suite while enjoying a bottle of champagne that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had always said I drank too much wine when I was stressed. Apparently, I drank just the right amount when I was winning. My phone rang at exactly 8 p.m. Not Marcus this time, but his mother. Patricia Chin had never liked me, always making snide comments about how I wasn't traditional enough for her precious son. She'd be calling to blame me for destroying her family's reputation, no doubt. Elena, darling, Patricia's voice dripped with false sweetness. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Hello, Patricia. No misunderstanding on my end. How can I help you? This FBI business is obviously some kind of mistake. Marcus would never. Marcus would never what? Cheat on his wife? Ignore financial irregularities? Sign documents without reading them? Because I have evidence that he's done all three with remarkable consistency. A sharp intake of breath. Patricia wasn't used to being interrupted, especially not by the daughter-in-law she'd spent 5 years trying to intimidate into submission. Elena, you're obviously upset about this Sarah situation, but destroying Marcus's business won't solve anything. Think about your future. Without him, what do you have? I almost laughed. Patricia had no idea that I'd been preparing for this exact question for months. Well, let's see. I have my own consulting firm which signed 6 major contracts this week. I have a master's degree in corporate law and another in marketing. I have $2 million in assets that Marcus doesn't even know exist. And I have something Marcus has never had, actual business ethics. You can't be serious about this divorce nonsense. Marriage is about forgiveness, Elena. About working through difficulties. You're absolutely right, Patricia. Marriage is about forgiveness. It's also about respect, honesty, and not embezzling money with your mistress. Marcus seems to have missed those parts of the marriage manual. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd been recording this conversation too. David had taught me that in high-stakes divorces, every interaction was potential evidence. Her attempts to pressure me into reconciliation would look great in front of a judge, especially when combined with the voicemails she'd left threatening to make sure I never worked in this city again. The real surprise came the next morning when Marcus's younger sister Jennifer called. Unlike her mother, Jennifer had always been cordial to me, though we'd never been close. Her voice was different this time, conspiratorial, almost excited. Elena, can we meet for coffee? There are things you need to know about Marcus that even you don't know. An hour later, I was sitting across from Jennifer in a trendy cafe downtown, watching her fidget with her engagement ring while she worked up the courage to speak. I've known about Sarah for 2 years, she finally said. I saw them together at a conference in Chicago. Marcus begged me not to tell you, said it was just a business thing, that he loved you and would end it soon. But he didn't end it. No. It got worse. Elena, Marcus has been stealing from the family trust to fund his lifestyle with Sarah. The expensive trips, the jewelry, the apartment he rented for her downtown, all of it came from money that was supposed to be for his and my inheritance. This was new information. I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten. How much? Over $1 million. Dad's been covering for him, moving money around to hide the shortfall. They thought no one would notice until after grandfather's death, which could be years away. Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed me bank statements, trust documents, and email chains that painted a picture of financial manipulation that went far beyond Sarah's small-time embezzlement. The Chin family had been robbing themselves to subsidize Marcus's affair. Why are you telling me this? Jennifer's smile was sharp, reminding me suddenly of her mother. Because Marcus threw me under the bus yesterday when the FBI started asking questions. He told them I'd been handling the trust paperwork, that any irregularities were my responsibility. My own brother tried to make me a scapegoat for his crimes. Now I understood. This wasn't about loyalty to me. This was about Jennifer protecting herself from Marcus's desperation. But her motivations didn't matter. Information was information, and this particular information was dynamite. I have copies of everything, she continued. Bank records, forged signatures, emails where Marcus explicitly discusses using trust funds for personal expenses. I'll testify that he acted alone, But I want immunity and I want him to face consequences. I studied Jennifer's face, looking for signs of deception. She seemed genuinely angry, genuinely hurt by her brother's betrayal. More importantly, she seemed genuinely terrified of going to prison for crimes she hadn't committed. I'll need to verify everything with my lawyer, but if your information checks out, we can definitely work together. Jennifer nodded eagerly. There's more. Sarah isn't just stealing money, she's been selling business secrets to Marcus's competitors. I have proof of payments from Hartwell Industries' biggest rival, transactions that correspond exactly with times when Marcus lost major contracts to them. The picture was becoming clearer and it was uglier than I'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been spectacularly incompetent, allowing his mistress to destroy his business from the inside while he was too infatuated to notice. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Emergency meeting. FBI wants to interview you about additional charges. This is bigger than we thought. I looked at Jennifer, who was watching me nervously. How soon can you get those documents to my lawyer? They're in my car. Perfect. It looks like Marcus is about to discover that betraying family has consequences he never imagined. As we walked toward the parking garage, I couldn't help but smile. Marcus had always prided himself on being smarter than everyone around him. He was about to learn that underestimating people, especially the women in his life, was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made. The Chin family emergency meeting was called for Sunday evening at their Beacon Hill estate, the kind of old money fortress that was designed to intimidate people like me. I arrived uninvited, which was exactly the point. Power plays work best when your opponents don't see them coming. The butler who answered the door looked genuinely confused. Mrs. Chin, the family isn't expecting. They are now. I stepped past him into the marble foyer, my heels clicking with authority I'd never felt when Marcus used to drag me to these suffocating family gatherings. Where are they meeting? The library, ma'am, but... I was already walking, following the sound of raised voices down the hall. Through the heavy oak doors, I could hear Marcus's father Robert shouting something about damage control, while Patricia's shrill voice demanded someone fix this mess immediately. I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. The scene was everything I'd hoped for. Marcus sat slumped in a leather chair like a scolded child, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled. Sarah wasn't there. Apparently, even the Chin family had standards about which criminals they'd allow in their library. Patricia was pacing near the fireplace, while Robert sat behind the massive desk that had belonged to Marcus's grandfather, frantically shuffling through legal documents. The only person who looked calm was Grandfather William, 93 years old and sharp as ever, sitting in his wheelchair by the window. When he saw me, he actually smiled. "Elena, my dear. How lovely that you could join us." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. "Grandfather, she can't be here," Marcus said, finally showing some life. "This is a private family meeting about confidential matters." "Actually," I said, placing my briefcase on the coffee table with deliberate precision, "since I own 60% of the business you're discussing, and since federal investigators have asked me to monitor any attempts at obstruction of justice, I'd say this is exactly where I need to be." Robert's face went red. "You little..." "Careful, Robert." My voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I'm recording this conversation and witness intimidation is a federal crime." I pulled my phone from my purse and placed it on the table, the red recording light clearly visible. David had taught me that rich people behaved much better when they knew their words might end up as evidence. Patricia stopped pacing. "Elena, surely we can come to some arrangement. This has gotten out of hand, but we're all family here." "Family." I laughed, and it echoed off the library's vaulted ceiling. "Patricia, for 5 years you've made it clear that I'm not good enough for your precious son. You've criticized everything from my career to my choice not to have children immediately. And now that Marcus has committed multiple felonies, suddenly I'm family." Grandfather William chuckled from his corner. "She has you there, Patricia. You've never treated the girl with an ounce of respect." "Father, please," Robert interjected. "We need to focus on protecting the family assets. The trust. The trust that Marcus has been stealing from?" I opened my briefcase and pulled out the documents Jennifer had given me. "The one where he's taken over $1 million to fund his affair? That trust." Marcus went white. How did you? Your sister. Apparently, when you tried to frame her for your crimes, she decided family loyalty only goes so far. I spread the bank statements across the antique coffee table like a dealer laying out cards. Each document was perfectly organized, chronologically arranged, and utterly damning. This is what your son has been doing while you thought he was building a business empire. Hotel suites in Miami charged to the trust. A luxury apartment downtown for his mistress. Jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. All funded by money that was supposed to secure your family's future. Robert's hands shook as he picked up the documents. Marcus, tell me this isn't true. Marcus couldn't meet his father's eyes. Dad, I can explain. There's more, I continued, enjoying the way Marcus flinched at my words. Sarah hasn't just been embezzling from the company. She's been selling business secrets to your competitors. I have proof of payments from Jameson Corp totaling over $200,000, corresponding exactly with the contracts Marcus mysteriously lost to them over the past year. I pulled out another folder, this one containing screenshots of Sarah's banking records and email communications that Jennifer had somehow obtained. The woman had been thorough in her revenge against her brother. So to summarize, I said, standing and beginning to pace like a prosecutor addressing a jury, Marcus has committed adultery, embezzlement, trust fraud, and corporate espionage. Sarah has committed embezzlement, corporate espionage, and money laundering. And you all want to know how we can make this go away quietly. The silence stretched for almost a minute. Finally, Grandfather Williams spoke. Marcus, you're an idiot. Grandfather. No, boy. You had a brilliant wife who built your company for you, a family fortune to support you, and a future that most men only dream of. And you threw it all away for what? Some gold digger who was robbing you blind while you were too stupid to notice. William turned to me, his eyes bright with something that might have been admiration. Elena, what do you want? I'd been waiting for this question. I want Marcus to sign over his remaining 40% of the company to me. I want a full confession about the trust fund theft. I want Sarah prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I want an uncontested divorce with no alimony claims. That's everything, Robert protested. You'd leave him with nothing. He left himself with nothing the moment he chose Sarah over his marriage. I'm just making it official. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes filled with something that might have been genuine remorse. Elena, please. We can work this out. I love you. Love. I gathered my documents and put them back in my briefcase. Marcus, you don't even know what love means. Love is building something together. Love is trust. Love is not stealing from your family to buy jewelry for your mistress. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final shot. Oh, and Marcus? The FBI will be here tomorrow morning with search warrants for the family trust accounts. I'd suggest you use tonight to figure out whether you want to cooperate or spend the next decade in federal prison. As I left the library, I heard Grandfather Williams' voice behind me. Patricia, the girl's got more backbone than the rest of this family combined. Maybe if you'd treated her better, she'd have been willing to save your worthless son. The butler held the front door open for me, and I swear I saw approval in his eyes. In the car, I called David with the update. The Chens would try to save themselves now, probably by throwing Marcus completely under the bus. Family loyalty was a beautiful thing until federal charges were involved. By tomorrow, Marcus would understand that underestimating me had cost him everything he'd ever cared about. And we were still just getting started. Retry him. The courtroom was packed with reporters, business associates, and curious onlookers who'd been following what the media had dubbed the tech mogul takedown. I sat in the front row behind the plaintiff's table, wearing a navy Armani suit that cost more than Sarah's entire legal defense fund. Power dressing wasn't just about looking good, it was about sending a message. Marcus entered through the defendant's entrance looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight loss or the hollow look in his eyes. Sarah shuffled in behind him, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. She tried to plea bargain her way out of this mess, but federal prosecutors weren't interested in small fish when they had a chance to expose an entire network of corporate fraud. David leaned over to whisper in my ear. Judge Morrison is tough but fair. She's seen cases like this before, and she doesn't tolerate financial manipulation. Are you ready for your testimony? I nodded, though my stomach was doing somersaults. For all my strategic planning, standing up in federal court to testify against your own husband was still surreal. But then I remembered Marcus reaching across me to hold Sarah's hand, and my resolve solidified like steel. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Walsh, was everything I'd hoped for: sharp, thorough, and absolutely ruthless when it came to financial crimes. She'd spent 3 weeks building her case with the precision of a master architect, and today was the foundation pour. Your Honor, Walsh began, addressing Judge Morrison, what we have here isn't just adultery or even simple embezzlement. This is a systematic pattern of financial fraud that victimized not only the defendant's wife and business partners, but also defrauded the federal government through false tax claims and violated interstate commerce laws through corporate espionage. She clicked a remote, and the courtroom screens filled with financial documents. Over the past 18 months, Marcus Chin stole $1.3 million from his family trust, embezzled $400,000 from his own company, and allowed his co-conspirator Sarah Williams to sell trade secrets worth an estimated $2 million to competing firms. The numbers hit the courtroom like physical blows. I watched Marcus's parents in the gallery behind me. Patricia looked like she might faint, while Robert was frantically taking notes, probably calculating how much this would cost the family in legal fees and settlements. Sarah's attorney stood up. Your Honor, my client was manipulated by Mr. Chin. She was led to believe that these expenses were legitimate business costs and that the information sharing was authorized by. Objection, Walsh interrupted smoothly. Ms. Williams opened her own bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and used sophisticated encryption software to communicate with competitors. That's not the behavior of someone who thought she was conducting legitimate business. Judge Morrison sustained the objection, and Sarah's lawyer sat down looking defeated. The first witness was Jennifer Chin, Marcus's sister, who testified about discovering the trust fund thefts. She was nervous but thorough, explaining how Marcus had forged their grandfather's signature on withdrawal authorizations and created fake invoices to justify the transfers. Did you confront your brother about these irregularities? Walsh asked. Yes. He told me it was a temporary loan, that he was investing in the business and would pay it back with interest. He begged me not to tell our parents. And did you keep his secret? Jennifer's voice broke slightly. Until he tried to blame me for the missing money when the FBI started investigating. That's when I realized Marcus was willing to destroy anyone to protect himself. The family dynamics were brutal to watch. Grandfather Williams sat in his wheelchair, staring at Marcus with undisguised disappointment. This was a man who'd built a business empire through hard work and ethical practices, watching his grandson destroy everything he'd worked for. Then it was my turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like the longest journey of my life. Every eye in the courtroom was on me, including Marcus's. For a split second I saw the man I'd fallen in love with in college. Vulnerable, scared, human. Then I remembered the hotel receipts, the deleted text messages, the way he'd introduced me as just my wife at business dinners where I'd closed half the deals. Walsh's questioning was methodical and precise. We went through the timeline of my discoveries, the documentation I'd gathered, the business relationships I'd built that Marcus had claimed credit for. With each answer, the picture became clearer. I hadn't just been Marcus's wife. I'd been his business partner, his strategic advisor, and his chief revenue generator, all while being systematically excluded from any official recognition or ownership. Mrs. Chin, when did you first become aware of your husband's relationship with Sarah Williams? March 15th of last year. I found hotel receipts in his jacket pocket from a weekend when he claimed to be at a business conference. The hotel was in Miami, but the conference was in Boston. What did you do with this information? I hired a private investigator and began documenting everything. I also started protecting our joint assets and building my own client base, because I suspected this wasn't going to end well. The defense attorney, a slick corporate lawyer who probably cost more per hour than most people's monthly salaries, tried to paint me as a vindictive wife seeking revenge. But Walsh had prepared me well. Mrs. Chin, is this about revenge against your husband? No. This is about justice. Marcus didn't just cheat on me, he stole from his family, defrauded his business partners, and compromised national economic security by selling trade secrets. If I'd wanted revenge, I would have posted his affair on social media. Instead, I gathered evidence and reported crimes to the appropriate authorities. The courtroom was dead silent. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Walsh pulled up the security footage from the movie theater. The night that started everything. The footage was crystal clear. Marcus reaching across me to hold Sarah's hand, the two of them whispering while I sat there like a piece of furniture. "Mrs. Chin, can you describe what's happening in this video?" I looked directly at Marcus as I answered. "That's my husband choosing his mistress over his wife on our 5th wedding anniversary." It was the moment I realized that the man I'd built a life with no longer existed, if he ever had. Marcus was crying now, but whether from remorse or self-pity I couldn't tell. Sarah was staring at her hands, probably realizing that her meal ticket was about to be wearing an orange jumpsuit. The prosecution rested and I walked back to my seat knowing that I'd just sealed my husband's fate. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments and probably a verdict. But today I'd stood up in federal court and told the truth about what Marcus Chin had done to me, to his family, and to everyone who'd trusted him. As I left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. This wasn't about publicity, it was about accountability. And tomorrow, Marcus would finally be held accountable for every lie he'd told and every dollar he'd stolen. The woman who used to wait for him was done waiting. Justice, however, was just getting started. 6 months after the verdict. Marcus got 7 years federal prison, Sarah got 5. I was standing in the penthouse office of what had formerly been Chin Technologies, now officially renamed Rodriguez Strategic Consulting. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was occupying the same corner office where Marcus used to hold his important meetings with Sarah. The business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. Turns out, when you actually deliver results instead of just promising them, clients notice. We'd expanded to 15 employees, opened a satellite office in Boston, and our revenue had tripled. The FBI investigation had inadvertently become the best marketing campaign I'd ever run. Nothing says ethical business practices like cooperating with federal prosecutors. My assistant knocked and entered with her usual efficiency. "Elena, Dr. Chin is here for your lunch appointment." David Chin, no relation to Marcus despite the surname, walked in carrying takeout from the Thai place we'd discovered during those late nights preparing for trial. He'd been my lifeline during the darkest moments of the legal proceedings, the one person who understood that beneath my strategic exterior, I was still processing the betrayal of someone I'd loved for 7 years. "How did the morning meetings go?" he asked, unpacking pad thai and setting it on the conference table that used to host Marcus's fraudulent business deals. "Hartwell Industries wants to expand our contract to include their European operations. Jameson Corp., the same company that was buying secrets from Sarah, just offered us a consulting deal worth $2 million over 3 years." I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Apparently they're very interested in ethical business intelligence, now that their previous sources are unavailable. David smiled, the kind of genuine expression I'd forgotten existed during my marriage. As a forensic psychiatrist specializing in corporate narcissism, he'd been invaluable during the trial, helping me understand that Marcus's behavior wasn't just infidelity. It was a pattern of pathological entitlement that had probably existed long before I'd met him. "Any word from the family?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be complicated. The Chin family dynamics had shifted dramatically since the trial. Grandfather William had survived the shock of Marcus's conviction and had surprised everyone by asking to meet with me privately. That conversation had been one of the strangest of my life. "William wants to change his will," I said, picking at my food. "He's cutting Marcus out entirely and leaving his personal assets to charity, but he wants to leave me the family house in Nantucket. Says it's payment for services rendered to the family's moral education." "And how do you feel about that?" It was such a therapist question that I had to laugh. David had been clear from the beginning that our relationship was complicated by the trauma I'd experienced, and he'd insisted we take things slowly. No grand romantic gestures, no rush to replace what I'd lost. Just honest conversations and the kind of partnership I'd never had with Marcus. "I feel like I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop," I admitted. 5 years of gaslighting doesn't disappear overnight. Sometimes I wake up wondering if this success is real, or if I'm about to discover that I've been as delusional as Marcus was. David reached across the table and took my hand, gently asking permission with his eyes first. It was such a contrast to Marcus's possessive grabbing that I still sometimes flinched from unexpected touch. "The difference," he said quietly, is that your success is built on actual work and ethical practices. Marcus's empire was built on lies and theft. Reality has a way of sorting that out eventually. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. The civil suits were finally wrapping up. I'd recovered most of the stolen money plus damages, and the various fraud victims were getting their settlements. But the message today was different. Elena, you need to see this. Marcus is trying to appeal his sentence. Claims he was manipulated by Sarah and deserves a reduced sentence due to emotional distress from your divorce proceedings. I showed David the message and his expression darkened. As someone who'd spent years studying manipulative personalities, he'd predicted this would happen. He's never going to accept responsibility, is he? I asked. Probably not. In his mind, he's the victim here. You destroyed his life, Sarah betrayed him, his family abandoned him. The possibility that he made choices and deserves consequences doesn't fit his self-image. There was a knock at the door. Jennifer Chin entered, looking nervous but determined. Since testifying against her brother, she'd been ostracized by most of the family, but she'd also started working as a paralegal for David's law firm, channeling her insider knowledge of corporate fraud into something positive. Elena, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to know about Marcus's appeal. He's claiming that you orchestrated everything from the beginning, that you manipulated him into the affair with Sarah as part of some elaborate scheme to steal his business. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Even by Marcus's standards, this was breathtakingly audacious. He's saying what now? His new lawyer is arguing that you're some kind of criminal mastermind who seduced him into marriage, then psychologically manipulated him into having an affair so you could destroy him and take his company. They're calling you a black widow, who preys on successful men. David's grip on my hand tightened. Elena, this is actually good news. How is accusing me of being a criminal mastermind good news? Because it's so obviously delusional that it will backfire spectacularly. No judge is going to believe that you somehow mind-controlled him into embezzling from his family and selling trade secrets. If anything, this will make him look even more manipulative and unrepentant. Jennifer nodded eagerly. Plus, I have recordings of Marcus bragging about how he was handling you, how you were too naive to ever figure out what he was really doing. His own words prove he knew exactly what he was doing. I leaned back in my chair, processing this latest development. A year ago, Marcus's accusations would have devastated me, made me question everything about myself. Now they just seemed pathetic. The desperate lies of a man who couldn't accept that his victims had become stronger than him. Let him appeal, I said finally. Let him tell the world that his wife was too smart for him, that she saw through his lies and built something better than anything he ever imagined. Let him explain to federal judges how the woman he treated like a secretary somehow orchestrated a conspiracy that fooled him, his family, and his business partners for years. David smiled, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt genuinely free. Marcus could spend the rest of his prison sentence blaming me for his choices. I had a business to run, a life to build, and a future that belonged entirely to me. The woman who used to wait for him had stopped waiting and started winning. And no appeal was going to change that. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 18 months after Marcus's conviction. Prison stationery, his familiar handwriting, my name written with the same careful penmanship he'd used on our wedding invitations. My assistant Jennifer had placed it on my desk with a questioning look, and I'd let it sit there for 3 hours before finally opening it. Elena, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I understand now. Prison gives you a lot of time to think, and I've been thinking about us every day for the past year and a half. I was wrong about everything. About Sarah, about the money, about treating you like you didn't matter. I want to make things right. Would you visit me? Just once. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to see you. I need to apologize properly face to face. There are things I never told you, things that might help you understand why everything went so wrong. I love you, Lena. I know I destroyed that love, but it's still true. Marcus. I read it twice, then walked to the window of my corner office and stared out at the city I'd conquered in the ruins of my marriage. Boston looked different from 30 floors up. Smaller, more manageable. Power changed your perspective on everything, including the past. My phone rang. David, as if he had some sixth sense about when I needed to talk. How's your day going? He asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice. We'd been together for 8 months now, though. Together was still being defined carefully. Trust was something I was learning to rebuild one conversation at a time. Marcus wrote me a letter. Silence. Then, what kind of letter? The desperate kind. He wants me to visit him in prison. Says he needs to apologize and explain everything. I folded the letter and slipped it into my desk drawer. What do you think? I think that's entirely your decision. But Elena, be careful. Narcissists often use apologies as manipulation tactics. They say what they think you want to hear to regain control. That afternoon, I found myself driving to MCI Shirley, the medium-security federal prison where Marcus was serving his sentence. I hadn't planned to go. It was an impulse decision that surprised even me. But something about his letter had stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried. The visiting room was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lighting, plastic chairs, the smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with desperation. Marcus appeared after 20 minutes and I barely recognized him. He'd lost at least 40 pounds, his expensive haircut had grown out into something that belonged on any ordinary person, and his orange jumpsuit hung loose on his diminished frame. When he saw me, his face crumpled like he might cry. Elena. God, you look. He stopped himself as if realizing he'd lost the right to comment on my appearance. I'd dressed carefully for this visit. Professional but not trying to impress. Successful but not flaunting it. The navy suit was armor, the pearls were my father's last gift to me, and the wedding ring Marcus had given me was notably absent from my finger. You said you had things to explain, I said without preamble. I'm here. Explain. He sat across from me at the small table, his hands folded like a penitent child. The money, the affairs, none of it was about you not being enough. You were always enough, Elena. You were everything. Then why? Because I was terrified of you. The words came out in a rush like he'd been practicing them. You were so smart, so capable. You built my company better than I ever could have. You made me look good in meetings where I barely understood the technical details. And instead of being grateful, I resented it. I studied his face, looking for the manipulation David had warned me about. But Marcus looked genuinely broken, genuinely ashamed. Sarah made me feel important, he continued. She asked me to explain things she already knew, praised ideas that were actually yours. She made me feel like the genius everyone thought I was, instead of the fraud I knew myself to be. So you chose her over me because she lied to you better than I told you the truth? Yes. The admission hung in the air between us. And I let her steal from the company because admitting she was a criminal would mean admitting I'd been fooled by her. My ego couldn't handle that. I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of sad understanding. Marcus hadn't been evil, just pathetically insecure and willing to destroy everything rather than face his own inadequacy. The family trust? I asked. I wanted to prove I could provide for her the way I provided for you. I wanted to be the successful man she thought I was, even if it meant stealing to maintain the illusion. We sat in silence for several minutes. Around us, other prisoners were having their own difficult conversations with visitors. Wives, children, parents trying to maintain connections across the divide of incarceration. Elena, Marcus said finally, I know it's too late for us. I know I destroyed everything we had. But I need you to know that losing you was the worst consequence of everything I did. Worse than prison, worse than losing the business, worse than my family disowning me. Because you loved me? Because I realized too late that you were the only person who ever believed I was worth loving, and I threw that away for someone who was just using me. I looked at this diminished version of the man who'd once been the center of my world and I felt nothing. Not anger, not love, not even pity. Just a kind of distant sadness for the life we might have had if he'd been braver. Marcus, I hope you find peace with yourself. I hope you learn to value people who see your flaws and choose to love you anyway. But that person isn't going to be me. I stood to leave and he reached across the table like he wanted to touch my hand, then stopped himself. Elena, wait. There's something else. About Sarah and the baby she claimed was mine. I know it wasn't yours. The DNA test results were in the court records. That's not what I meant. His voice dropped to a whisper. The child was real, but it wasn't mine. It was her ex-husband's from London. She was using the pregnancy to try to get money from both of us. She never loved me either, Elena. We were both just resources to her. As I walked toward the exit, I felt the last piece of my old life finally click into place. Marcus and I had both been victims of Sarah's manipulation, but only one of us had chosen to become a perpetrator in turn. Only one of us had decided that being used justified using others. In the parking lot, I called David. How did it go? It went exactly like it needed to go. I'm done with that chapter of my life. Are you okay? I'm better than okay. I'm ready to start the next chapter. Driving home, I realized that seeing Marcus in prison hadn't given me closure. It had given me perspective. The man I'd loved had never really existed. I'd been in love with potential, with the person he could have been if he'd chosen courage over cowardice, honesty over ego, partnership over control. But that was his loss, not mine. I'd built something real from the ashes he'd left behind, and I wasn't looking back anymore. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. 2 years later, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my penthouse suite at the Four Seasons in Kyoto, adjusting the simple platinum band on my ring finger. It wasn't the gaudy diamond Marcus had proposed with. This ring was elegant, understated, and chosen together with David after months of honest conversations about what marriage meant to both of us. The past week had been a whirlwind. My company's expansion into Asian markets had exceeded every projection, and the International Business Conference had positioned Rodriguez Strategic Consulting as a major player in global corporate ethics consulting. 3 Fortune 500 companies had approached me about long-term partnerships, and Harvard Business School wanted me to guest lecture on building ethical business culture in the digital age. But the real victory wasn't professional, it was personal. I could look in the mirror now and see someone I genuinely liked, someone who'd learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between being loved and being valued. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Ready for our adventure, Mrs. Rodriguez? We decided to hyphenate our names, a small symbol of the partnership we'd built brick by brick over 3 years of careful, honest relationship building. The adventure he was referring to was our honeymoon. 2 weeks exploring Japan, no business meetings, no court appearances, no past demons to confront. Just us, discovering a country neither of us had visited, creating memories that belonged entirely to our future. A knock at the door interrupted my reflection. Room service with breakfast, I assumed, but when I opened it, I found a hotel manager looking apologetic and slightly nervous. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, but there's been a situation. A man claiming to be your former husband has been calling the hotel, demanding to know your room number. When we refused to give out guest information, he became quite agitated and threatened to contact the American embassy. My blood went cold. Marcus had been released from federal prison 6 months ago, but I'd assumed he'd disappeared into whatever life ex-convicts build for themselves. The idea that he'd tracked me to Japan was both impressive and terrifying. Did he say what he wanted? He claimed there was a family emergency and that he needed to speak with you urgently. Our security team reviewed the calls and frankly, ma'am, the man sounded unstable. I thanked the manager and immediately called David, who was having breakfast downstairs in the hotel restaurant. David, we have a problem. Marcus somehow found out where we are and he's trying to contact me through the hotel. I'll be right up. Within minutes, David was in my room, his psychiatrist instincts fully activated. Elena, this is stalking behavior. The fact that he tracked you internationally suggests this isn't a coincidence or desperation. It's obsession. We called hotel security and discovered that Marcus had also contacted the conference organizers, claiming to be my business partner and demanding information about my schedule. The level of planning and persistence was genuinely frightening. How did he even know I was in Japan? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. David pulled out his laptop and did a quick search. There it was, a Business Journal article about my keynote speech at the Tokyo conference, complete with photos of me accepting an award for International Leadership in Corporate Ethics. The article mentioned my hotel and the dates of my stay. Elena, we need to take this seriously. Stalking across international borders isn't impulsive behavior. It's calculated. He's been planning this. The hotel phone rang. The manager again sounding even more apologetic. Mrs. Rodriguez, the gentleman is now in our lobby. He's demanding to see you and becoming quite disruptive. Should we call the police? Yes, call them immediately. And please make sure he doesn't get access to the elevators. David and I went down to the lobby together, where we could see Marcus through the glass doors of the hotel's entrance. He looked wild, unkempt, agitated, Nothing like the controlled man I'd married or even the broken man I'd visited in prison. This was someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. The Tokyo police arrived within minutes, professional and efficient. Through a translator, they explained that Marcus had been staying at a budget hotel across the city and had been asking questions about me at various businesses in the area. He'd also attempted to enter the conference center where I'd spoken, claiming to be my husband. "This is harassment," David told the officers. "My wife has a restraining order against this man in the United States, and now he's followed her to Japan to continue the harassment." The police took statements from both of us and from hotel staff. Marcus was arrested for trespassing and disorderly conduct, but more importantly, they confirmed he'd be deported back to the United States within 48 hours. As we watched the police car drive away with Marcus in the back seat, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that the man I'd once loved had deteriorated so completely, and relief that this chapter was finally, definitively closed. "Are you okay?" David asked, putting his arm around me. "I'm better than okay. I'm free." That evening we had dinner at a traditional kaiseki restaurant overlooking a temple garden. The meal was a meditation in itself, course after course of perfectly prepared, beautifully presented food that celebrated the seasons and the moment. It was everything my marriage to Marcus had never been: mindful, balanced, respectful of tradition while embracing the present. "Elena," David said as we shared green tea ice cream for dessert, "I want you to know that what happened today doesn't change anything about us or our future. Marcus is your past, but he's not your shadow anymore." I reached across the table and took his hand, not frantically, not desperately, but with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to trust again. "David, 5 years ago I walked out of a movie theater because my husband chose another woman over me. I thought that was the end of my story. But it was actually the beginning. Everything that happened, the divorce, the trial, building my business, meeting you, it all started with having the courage to walk away from something that was wrong." The temple bells chimed softly in the distance as night settled over Kyoto. Tomorrow we'd visit the bamboo forest, explore ancient temples, and continue writing the story that belonged to us alone. But tonight, sitting in that peaceful restaurant with the man who'd helped me heal, I finally understood what I'd been searching for all along. Not revenge against Marcus, not validation from the world, but simply the quiet satisfaction of a life built on honesty, respect, and the revolutionary act of choosing yourself. The woman who used to wait for someone else to define her worth had learned to write her own definition. And the story she was writing was beautiful. Marcus could keep his obsessions and his regrets. I had chosen happiness and happiness had chosen me back. As we walked through the illuminated gardens back to our hotel, David's hand warm in mine, I realized I'd never once looked back over my shoulder to see if we were being followed. I was finally completely free.